welcome to The Whole Elephant. Thanks for being here. My guest today, Ryan Scott Oliver, I have admired his work for a long time now. If you've been along with me on this journey of this podcast, you know that Broadway is kind of my thing. And he is a big player in Broadway. He's won tons of things. Jonathan Larson Grant, Richard Rogers Award, tons of things. If you want to get a little taste of his stuff before you listen to our conversation, 35 Millimeter, the musical, Jasper and Deadland, good places to start if you want a little prep work before you get into this interview I did with him. It's one of those things where, you know, you admire someone and you admire their work. I was so looking forward to this podcast episode and getting a chance to meet him and chat. And then, you know, in life, when you meet somebody and they don't live up to expectations and you're kind of disappointed, this is the exact opposite. He's just the sweetest, nicest human. And I literally, this episode, if it were up to me, this episode would be like 4 hours long just because I didn't want to stop the conversation. And now I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the chat. Ryan, thanks for being here and doing this, man. I really appreciate it.
It is my pleasure. I'm so excited to be here.
How is New York on this fine Friday afternoon?
New York is pretty good. I moved with my husband upstate during the pandemic. We now live in a town called Beacon, New York. Okay. If you watched Severance, which is a really great show, everyone should watch it. It was filmed, like the city, like the town scenes were all filmed here.
Oh, nice.
A Quiet Place was filmed in this area. We love it. We're really obsessed with it. And it's getting colder, and I love the cold weather. So I'm being upstate by a river, by mountains, trees turning color. Truly, yeah. I always, when I was a kid, growing up in Los Angeles, I never really felt like Los Angeles felt like home, but I couldn't articulate that because I really had never been anywhere else.
Yeah, interesting.
But I always felt like I was meant to live in like the first 20 pages of a Stephen King novel, and now I do.
Nice. I'm assuming moving means you moved from the city.
Yes, we lived in New York City on the Upper East Side. We lived there for 16 years. And then we still, you know, we're still dragging our sorry butts into the city 3, 4, 5 times a week, both of us.
Yeah.
So we don't have to miss the city because we are constantly there taking an hour and a half.
So your husband is a Broadway photographer, that's right?
He is. He's one of, I would say he's one of the Broadway photographers.
Yeah.
If you walk into Times Square, you can't really look in any direction without seeing his photographs. So I'm very proud of him.
Very cool.
Yeah.
You grew up in Los Angeles. Where in Los Angeles?
In Pasadena. And I was there till I was 21. And then I went to grad school in New York and moved. I had barely spent much time anywhere else, you know, a couple of short trips. My family was like a very short vacation family. I feel like some families are like, if they're going to go on vacation, they're going to go for 3 weeks. My family was like 3 days tops.
Oh, nice.
I was in a summer camp in Colorado for a few weeks. But other than that, I was like Pasadena, Los Angeles for 21 years straight.
Yeah, that's my hood. I have a little recording studio in Northwest Pasadena, so I'm out there all the time. I love Pasadena.
I love that. It's great. It's great.
Talk to me about we're going to get into all of your success and all that stuff, but talk to me about the early days as a young kid in Pasadena.
Yeah.
What was the impetus? What was the drive, the love for musical theater? When did it start?
Yeah. Well, no one in my family and my extended family are artists. So I was fortunate to have found myself sort of magnetized towards this other family that lived nearby, who were obsessive musical theater people. And I became friends with the student, and we were all about the same age. And they, you know, would always want to put on shows in the living room. And they dragged me into it. And I cannot say how interested I was in that, like how important any of that was to me. But I knew I knew I enjoyed it. I knew it interested me a little bit. But when we were in seventh grade, they wanted to put on a production of Once Upon a Mattress by Mary Rogers. Um, and you get, when you do a musical, of course, those who have done them know that you get the libretto, and at the back of a lot of them you have the vocal book, right, where it's just the vocal line. And I was fascinated by like sheet music, and I was like basically pointing at the music and saying like, what's that? It was a key signature. And my friend, she had been taking piano lessons because her mom was a pianist and music director, and that began my love for music. And my love for music really didn't come necessarily from listening to a lot of music. It came from sort of the academic, mathematical part of music, which looking back on it, it feels so strange. But I also think that that speaks to destiny, and like it was just sort of meant to be. I went to a performing arts high school in Los Angeles, LACHSA, as some people refer to it, LA County High School for the Arts. Josh Groban was the year before me. There's a video of us in Fiddler on the Roof together on YouTube. And through high school, because I was there as a voice major, my love for music and understanding of music, blossomed. I was really good at music theory, really good at all of that stuff. But it was an assignment I had in 11th grade when we were looking at Edgar Allan Poe's stuff, as I'm sure we're going to get into. I have a very dark heart, and in terms of my interests. And the assignment, because we were at a performing arts high school, was that you were to take a Edgar Allan Poe story and you were supposed to apply your art to it. And I wrote a poem / lyric of The Telltale Heart. And it was very rhymey, and it was very fun, and it was very Sondheimy. I was getting into Sondheim at that time.
Sure.
And I was like, "Ooh, this is fun. I think I'm interested in this." And then I quickly, in 11th grade, I started working on I was also obsessed with like Les Mis, and I started working on a musical version of Arthur Miller's The Crucible, which I have to say was quite good. And it wasn't until I was in college when I called the estate to get the rights, and I was like, "So you'll let me know?" And they're like, "Yeah, we'll be pretty quick." And then they sent me the like, "You may not" email. And I just started writing there, and it was sort of a transition between 18 and 20 to really fully committing myself to writing. And I wasn't very good at the time, but I had talent, right. and I had a lot of drive, a lot of motivation, a lot of I was just so excited about it. So I was never discouraged when I would make something and people didn't necessarily respond the way I dreamed that they would. And as I was responding to all of the greats that I was listening to.
Yeah. Good God. I wish I had that. Was it always just writing? Because you can sing. I've heard you sing. You can sing. You. Was acting, singing ever part of the equation for you?
It was. I mean, I wish I kept a journal when I was in high school, because I was there, I wrote a song in 7th grade when I was kind of just, through the Once Upon a Mattress thing. And I, it was a nonsensical, stupid little love song. And then I don't remember writing anything in 9th grade or 10th grade. And 11th grade, I guess I started getting back into it. So I guess I wanted to be a performer. Like, I guess I did. I don't, because I was there we had a very vibrant opera program, very vibrant musical theater program. We had a great choir, and I excelled at all those things. I was the sort of the handsome leading man type. That was before I lost all my hair, and became my new type, grandpa curmudgeon. And so I was given a lot of opportunities, a lot of opportunities, and I really, I loved doing it. I really did love doing it. But it was interesting, much like my music, I vocally was I was too legit, too classic for like really having a career in musical theater, but I was not a strong enough legit singer to ever make it in opera. And just like my music, I mean, I think what I dealt with at UCLA when I went there for music composition was the musical theater people felt my music was too strange and too different, and the opera people felt it was too musical theater, and the classic people thought it was too musical theater.
Yeah.
And I think when I started teaching more, I got a job taking over the same musical theater camp that I was in as a kid. I took it over when I was 18, And I think my love for performing sort of moved on into my teaching. And so I had always had a lot of very performative teachers growing up that really made learning fun.
Yeah.
And so I think I was able to convert that. These days, it's like when I have the chance to perform, I feel like I get more anxious. And so I do love to sing. I have certainly have a good enough voice, but I couldn't dance. And I didn't really understand much about acting until I was teaching actors in like my mid 20s, my late 20s. So it was one of those things where it's like, oh, I mean, when I was at UCLA, I minored briefly in voice. And, you know, when I had sort of thought I had given up on it, and then the teacher saw me in a show and she said, hey, you should minor in this. And I said, okay, well, that was something that was interesting to me. And I remember coming to a voice lesson and she knew I was deeply unprepared. And she said, how much time did you spend preparing for this voice lesson? And I said, well, I record my lessons. So it was the amount of time it took to drive from my apartment in Westwood to this lesson, which was probably 15 minutes. And she said, and how much time did you spend today writing music? And I said, oh, about 8 hours. And she said, you know, here we are. It's time to, I'll never forget, she said, it's sometimes you have to cut off a limb to set yourself free.
Yeah.
And so that was the I guess the turning point where I was all in on the writing.
Very cool. Talk to me about the first break, the first time someone believed in you, the first time, you know, you got something in front of someone and someone said, yes, you can do this.
Yeah. I had a lot of success early on and in a very compact amount of years. After UCLA, I immediately went to NYU for graduate musical theater writing. And I went there because I thought like, well, I don't really have connections. I don't know anybody in New York. My work is, at that time, I was like, my work is still finding what it is. And so I went to NYU and I had been like the Crucible, the musical, right? So like I've been writing like art songs and like very kind of operatic and very like musically complex musicals that were just too much. They were just too much. And when I got to NYU, I realized that I actually knew a lot more than I thought I did, kind of to my detriment. Several of, you know, most people that came to that program knew nothing about writing musicals. That's why they were there. But me and a handful of other people were kind of theater queens and like felt we knew a lot and we were learning a lot about the business and we were learning a lot about various things. But the thing that was happening then was, you know, Pasek and Paul and Joy Conis and Brie Loudermilk and Kate Kerrigan had just come onto the scene. And I was like, who are these people? And why are they winning all these awards and getting all this attention? And I saw that they were writing a lot of standalone songs and musical reviews. And I sort of discovered formally the sound of the contemporary musical theater and also noticed that there was a lot of rock and pop in it, which I had never been a big rock and pop fan. And so I got to NYU and I immediately, don't worry, I'm really going to answer your question in a second.
No,
I got there and I immediately said, I have to change my sound. So these people who just met me suddenly met this rock pop person. And so my musical in 2007, which was the second year of our grad program, you read a thesis musical. We wrote a musical called Mrs. Sharp, which was based on a story that most people have forgotten about, the Pamela Smart teacher-student sex murder scandal from 1991.
Yeah, super light material.
Super light material, but we made it a comedy, like a very funny, scathing comedy. And, you know, against the advice of our faculty, we started submitting it for things. And we got accepted to a lot of things and we started winning awards. We won the Richard Rogers Award given out by Stephen Sondheim. You get to have a lunch with him. And that was a big moment because then you're afforded this rather large grant where you can get a great director, get a great actor. And we were at Playwrights Horizons. Jane Krakowski was the teacher. Michael Greif was the director. It was kind of like, this is Ali Stroker was in the cast, Alex Brightman. It was pretty nuts. It was pretty nuts. And that was 2009. And everything was really kind of going at a pace. And I would say like the Alive at 10 was sort of the set, or Mrs. Sharp, it used to be called Alive at 10. The Mrs. Sharp thing was like the setup for the big break, which was I started doing concerts 2009, 2010, and getting my work out there. And I was selling out Joe's Pub and developing a fan base, developing, also thanks to YouTube, which was, really becoming a major a player in getting, new writers material out.
Yeah.
And then that drew the attention of Disney, who hired me from a concert. They literally saw my teacher-student sex scandal musical, and they saw my other Peter Pan musical, which is about Peter Pan if he was like a boy prostitute. And they were like, this guy should write a Disney show. And so between those two events, and I won the Jonathan Larson grant, it was just sort of like, it was a lot. I will say, and we can get into my failures if we want to, because those are fun too. But I would say between 2009 and 2012, I was really seeing a lot of success, and more than anything, I was seeing a lot of validation and a lot of energy coming my way that said, you are skilled and you are meant to do this. And that was the beginning of the big long road for me.
Yeah. So I want to get into the success aspect of it a little bit. You've pretty much like won everything and had all the success that you can have, quote unquote. That's off nice. Broadway.
Sure.
So
yes.
Can you explain to us what does on Broadway, off Broadway mean?
Yeah. So on Broadway just essentially means the very large handful of, I think, 45 theaters that are in a specific area of Broadway. And, if your show's in those houses, it's a Broadway show. And if it's not in that house, it's not a Broadway show. And pretty much any other theater, by and large, in Manhattan would be considered an off-Broadway theater. And then they have their own rules. And if they're a smaller theater, then it's off Broadway. And those lines get super blurry. Yeah, there's your answer for that.
So is on Broadway, obviously that's like the massive goal, but is that the end goal? Is there success to be had and not be on Broadway? Because to me, it seems like, I ask because it just seems like there's so many different reasons for something not to be on Broadway.
Yeah.
And then really good works don't make it. And then really commercial but not as good works do make it. and so I wonder what your take is on that, and if that really is the end goal, or if there's success to be had elsewhere.
Oh, absolutely. I think when I was starting out, I was a very smug young gay, and I was very, it wasn't a question of will I win a Tony, it was a question of how many, right? Mm-hmm. And my perception of what I wanted my career to be has really evolved. And I would absolutely like to have a show on Broadway, and I hope I will. And of course, the eye on the prize right now in my life is to have a show on Broadway, and maybe a few. But when I've, in the times when things have been a little slower, and I've really thought about, I'm 38 years old, when I really think about the last 8 years of my life as I'm sort of heading into, early middle age. Is that fair? Is my early middle age?
I'm 40, so I'll let you define it for both of us.
That's great. I love that. What I would actually say, what my version of success would be that I have some level of access to major studios and some Broadway producers, and there's a feeling that some of my work, if it were right, could find its way to Broadway. Yeah. But that I can have any idea that is a good idea that I work my ass off on, and there's a theater somewhere in the country that likes me a lot, and I form a relationship with them where they basically say, every couple of seasons, we're going to program your work. Because I would say the most annoying thing about writing a new work, especially if you don't have a producer, but you're good and you have an idea, is that, forgive me, my dog is barking because he's very mad about this topic too.
He's angry.
He's very angry. that you write the work and then it's like, but who's going to see it, or how?
Wow.
And so much of my tactic the last 8 years has been to record EPs and albums, because I don't want the work to just sit in a drawer. I want people to discover it, and
Mm.
then, and also, to continue to get the word out. So if I had a theater in the country that I had a solid bond with, that I felt was doing good work, and this theater could be 100 seats, 150 seats, 200 seats. We're not talking about a large theater. We're not talking about a lot of money, and it's just to know that I can make something and know that it will see the light of day
Yeah.
with regularity. That would be success for me.
Right. Right. Is there? I mean, we don't. You don't sound bitter, so I don't want to say that. It's a bitterness, but is it is it strange to be working on original stuff, original material you're writing, and then Beetlejuice just pops up in a theater with Eddie Perfect, who no one had heard of pre Beetlejuice. You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean? Like, is that a
yeah.
weird
I do.
thing for something you're just like going through your childhood favorite movies? Like, well, what of these could
Yeah,
I write? Like, how
yeah.
does that work in your brain?
Yeah, it's interesting you should bring Beetlejuice up, and I don't think I've actually talked about this on a podcast, because I actually spec'd for Beetlejuice,
Hmm.
meaning I essentially auditioned for it.
Well, I said
Um,
Beetlejuice because it seems like your style would fit well. I mean, Crazy Town
yeah,
could literally be in Beetlejuice if it
right,
wanted to be.
right, right. You are not wrong, and you are not alone in having thought that, because I think there were a number of people on that team who thought maybe me, and
Yeah.
it was a pool of us. There were several other writers whose names I won't out, but we all know each other, and we all were sort of trading jokes about the experience. What's interesting is that if anybody's familiar with Beetlejuice, one of the songs that I was asked to write was the Dead Mom
Hmm.
song, and it's funny because at the time it was disappointing. At the time it was sort of like I was destined to do this, and at the time it was sort of like I'm the person who should do this. But one of the learning lessons I think I've had is, for I don't know Beetlejuice as it is on Broadway. I don't know that show particularly well, but I've experienced a lot of the totally delightful songs.
Sure.
But I could not have written those. That's not my style. That's not how I write. That's not what I personally gravitate towards.
Right.
And the reality is that the Beetlejuice that exists on Broadway is a success, and of course it had its difficulties, but that show is going to be in license. That show will never, at any moment of any day, somewhere in the world, Beetlejuice will be performed, and that, to me, in terms of what the producers and what the commercial theater wants, that makes it a success. And there's a lot of kids that love, love, love that music.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying like my Beetlejuice would have been at Lincoln Center, but like probably a better place for it. Like
Mm.
I just I think that my darkness and my taste and the things I'm constantly gravitating towards um, does lend itself to something like Beetlejuice. But at the end of the day, how I would have written Beetlejuice is not ultimately what the producers were looking for.
Sure. Sure.
And in so many ways, you're everyone's saving a lot of time when
Hmm. Hmm.
you don't go down that road.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I enjoyed it. I loved it. I love the music and all that. I don't. It's no way meant to disparage Eddie Perfect
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah, yeah.
or Beetlejuice. Although he did say yes to this podcast and then ghosted me after that, so maybe it is to disparage Eddie Perfect. But
Oh, boo, boo, Eddie.
let's get into the writing process, because I'm
Sure.
not sure that many people know how a musical works. It takes a long time. There's a lot of process. So
Yeah,
you have an idea, or you're
yeah,
commissioned to something, or
yeah,
so a project starts and there's a blank page.
yeah.
Go.
Great. So I either tend to write music and lyrics, or sometimes co-lyrics, music and co-lyrics, or I will write book music and lyrics. And Janine Tazori, who of course wrote Phone Home and Carolina Change, etc.,
Mhm.
was one of my teachers at NYU, and she would always say, her tactic professionally was to write one for them and then one for herself. Which is, if you look at Shrek, that was for them, and Millie was for them, but
Sure.
Fun Home and Carolina Change, those were for her. And I've always I've always maintained that as part of my process. So if I'm writing book music and lyrics, um, I and actually this, I can actually address this either way. Research. The first thing, most important thing to me is research.
Mm.
Um, if I'm writing book music and lyrics, I'm going to spend probably almost a year doing research, which includes um, outlining the story,
Yeah,
doing a
wow.
full treatment of the story, which is to say, an extended synopsis, exploration of characters, exploration of themes, sort of an academic approach where you're sort of like, this is what this is.
So the Ken
Um,
Davenport write a musical in 30 days, that's not your deal.
nope, nope. I maybe a short one for sure. If you have 30
Sure,
minutes,
sure.
I would
I
say if you
tried.
had
I
30,
called it my 30 days of anxiety and guilt. That's what I called
yes.
that attempting to do that.
If I had 30 days, and maybe this is a more direct answer to your question, if I had 30 days to write a musical, first of all, I think a 15-minute musical would be all I think anyone could reasonably be expected to write in 30 days. I
Sure.
would do 10 days of research and then including outlining what I was doing and then 20 days of writing the darn thing.
Yeah,
Or
no,
actually, I would even say 15 days of writing the darn thing, showing it to some friends, getting feedback, and then 4 days of revisions. That would be
right,
my
right.
process.
No, I like breaking it down like that. That's cool. So okay, you can pick any of your shows. What is the research look? What are you looking at? Are you looking at time period? Are you looking at,
Absolutely.
what are you
Absolutely.
looking at?
Yeah. Um, So with a new project, I'm I'm looking, so from a music standpoint, I'm looking at the time period, I'm looking at the sound of the world of this musical. I'm also always looking at, so right now, I just wrote a show, or I'm writing a show, that's an original piece, that is sort of set on a distant Maine island, very very Stephen Kingy.
Mm,
So I'm going to look at music that I feel like sounds like this island and feels like this island and feels like the time and the musical oral world that I'm trying to create. But then I'm always going to have an eye towards musicals, regardless of if they sound like this show, and what are some musical constructions and what are some musical structures and what are some musical um, approaches that could apply to this. I'm also always listening to all kinds of rock, pop, folk, gospel, you name it. I'm listening to everything that is contemporary because
mhm.
this is the music that is defining our time. So whenever, even if I'm writing a show and I'm about to start a show that's set in the 1960s, even a show that isn't set in the 1960s, I'm still going to make sure that I have enough of the sound of today to make the 1960s
Right,
feel relevant to today while honoring the sound of the 60s. So I'm doing a
right.
lot of research on that. If I'm doing story stuff, I'm going to watch a lot of movies. I'm going to read a lot of books. I'm going to revisit some of my books on structure, and I'm going to take a lot of notes. I'm talking like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages, handwritten notebook paper notes. And during, if the story is already established, so I've been commissioned for the story, I know what the story is, I know who the characters are, and
Mm,
I don't have to do any of that work, then I think I could do the research in 3 to 5 months.
mm.
But if it's kind of a clean slate, it's going to take almost a year.
Wow.
And yeah, I'm just jotting notes on my usually in a notebook. I'll show this to you. Your listeners won't be able to see this, but you will see this. Like as an example, I have a note app. This is, you can sort of see, this is just
Yeah.
sort of like some of my notes, and you can just sort of see that it
Wow.
goes for, you know
Yes.
what I mean?
Yeah.
It's an extent, and I will constantly be collecting and compiling notes, and then those notes will become old, towards the end of the research phase, I'll be, certain things will start sticking together as
Yeah.
plot points or character points or structures. And then I'll develop an outline and I'll develop a full synopsis. I'll make that treatment, send it to some friends, get feedback on big questions. Because this is the other thing about writing a musical. How many times do people go to see a reading of a show, or God forbid, a show that's made it all the way to Broadway? And everyone's like, there's a glaring problem here, right?
Yeah.
There's an obviously large thing that just makes this thing not work. You
Uh-huh.
can almost always figure that out in a treatment,
Right.
right? You
Right.
can almost always see the biggest problems of a musical really, really early on.
Mm,
And I think I get so afraid of wasting a year of my life on a new show,
right.
and and writing 2 hours of material to realize that an hour and a half of it doesn't work because
Right.
of some glaring reason.
No, I feel
And
like I
then
I feel like I need to send you some cash after this because I feel like you just unlocked in my brain why I've had the writer's block that I've had recently
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I didn't do that
Yeah.
pre-work.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense.
And I, the writer's block thing, and I don't say this in any way to be smug, but I don't ever have writer's block, or I so rarely have writer's block, because it's not about getting an idea. It's about sorting through 30 ideas
Yeah.
and figuring out which ones. So like when I get to a scene or a song, like you can, again, your listeners can't see this, but this is a scene that I'm about to write, which is kind of like all of my notes on this one scene.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about, and this is, so this has been, these ideas have been collected and congealed and sort of laid out in a scene structure, which includes the songs that are in that scene. And so it's really just about execution of the plan. And the plan always, a lot of writers, I think everyone's approach is either structured or organic. Structured meaning you plan the blueprint of the house and then you get the materials and you build the house. And organic, well, it's not really, in my mind, it's not a way to build a house, but a lot of people just want to like get some wood and start hammering stuff and seeing what the house could be. And then those people, I think, the beauty of somebody who just sort of sits down to write is that they have a better chance of discovery when they approach something organically. And they have a better chance for surprise and originality. Because a lot of times when we're writing something from a structured point of view and we're approaching it from such a distance, we are more likely to fall into structural tropes.
Yeah.
I won't say cliches, but things we've seen before, let's say.
Sure.
So, and as an example, the show I'm writing is 12 scenes. I've just written 7 of the scenes. And so that means now I'm on scene 8. But I got to tell you, I'm not really excited about writing it. And that was a clue to me that I didn't have enough information about it. So it's, before I sit down to get that writer's block, I can already feel that but scene 9, I'm like so excited to write. So I'm going to write scene 9 and then hopefully go back and hit scene 8. Because if you don't do the planning work, you very oftentimes will end up with something that is surfacey or a little empty, or doesn't, especially in a musical where the real estate, so to speak, every line needs to matter.
Right.
Every gesture needs to matter, right?
Yeah.
There's, in a film, in a Tarantino film, you could have a 15-minute scene that feels like it's mostly conversation and chat. And of course, something terrible will happen at the end.
Sure.
But in a musical, it's like, and especially when people are reviewing music, reading musicals to decide if they want to produce it or be the director or whatever. When they see a book scene, they're like, 1 page, 2 page. Oh no, there's a song, 3 page. Oh no, this is 4 pages. Oh, the book is crap. Do you know what I mean? And that's not my opinion about what it should be, but it's like that tells you how compactly, how tightly you have to construct a show. And to me, the idea of doing it an organic approach would never work for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, is this something that you mastered like over time? Because I'm applying myself to what you're saying right now.
Yeah,
And
of course, yeah.
I'm realizing in this moment that I'm trying to craft and build something as fast as I can.
Yeah.
So that I can show it to people and have them say that I'm good at it.
Yeah.
Mostly not to get into my story, but I'm outside of that world.
Yeah.
And so is it, I want to do it quickly so I get the validation from someone to say like, okay, you can do this.
Yeah.
What you're describing to me is almost like torture because it's such a delayed gratification way of doing things.
Yeah. I hear you completely. And I want to address what you're saying. What I will say though, is that at this point in my career, having, I made a promise to myself that I would write 1 musical a year. And I have yet to fail myself in that. Sometimes they're 23 minutes long, right? But most of the time they're full length. I love the process. I just love doing it. So I get so much gratification from my work. And because I feel like I've developed and given so much of my life to this, I can, again, not to sound smug, but like, I have a pretty good track record in terms of going, this is got to be a song that everyone's got to love. This has got to be a beautiful song that everyone thinks is beautiful. This has got to be the weird song that everyone's like, wow, cool, Ryan, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Glad it's in the show, but like, gonna skip that when I listen to it. I'm pretty good at being able to deliver things based on what they need to be.
Hmm.
And so I guess I give the validation to myself. And don't get me wrong, I'm as hungry for validation as anyone else is.
Yeah.
To what you were saying, I get that impulse. And I think at NYU in our first year, I was 20 years old, 2021. And you're just writing songs every week. You're put with somebody new in your class, you'll write a song together. Somebody new next week, you'll write a song. And so to anyone, I'm definitely not advising you, but I would say to any of your listeners who feel like they're at a point in their career, which may be this towards the start, where they before they give more time to this, they're like, I just need to know that I'm good. I would start with short musicals, short scenes, short songs. Yeah. It was in the act, every young writer I find has written a song cycle when they start out. And 35 millimeter wasn't even my first song cycle. Mm-hmm. But I wrote a 10-minute musical, and then I wrote a 15-minute musical. And the 10-minute musical went over very well. Mm-hmm. And the 15, 20-minute musical was a struggle and did not go over so well. But in just making something tiny, and going, because I always tell people, like, you shouldn't build a cruise liner until you've built a rowboat, right? Yeah. You shouldn't build a mansion before you've built a shack, right? And I think that if I would tell anybody, build that rowboat, build that shack, and get people to tell you it's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
And then build something bigger.
Yeah. I have 8 years in a row, I've written a 40-minute kids Christian Christmas musical.
Amazing.
But it's validation in a very specific small box world. You know what I mean?
I do.
But yeah, that it is what it is.
But you must know, even though it's a small box world, you must feel, especially having written 8 of them, right? Yeah. You're getting feedback on it.
Oh, totally.
And I'm sure one year you went, oh, this one's my best one. And then another year you were probably like, oh, maybe this was not the best one, right?
Sure.
Have you had that experience?
Oh, totally. So
then that must be really informative for you in going, why did this one work? Mm-hmm. And why did this one not work as well? And that kind of stuff, by the way, I think is one of the most important things you can do for yourself in terms of getting that sort of career advice for that strategy, and say, people love it when I do this, and they don't love it as much when I do that, and then following that. And as long as you love that thing, then following that.
Yeah. Are you good for another 15, 20-ish?
Sure, yeah.
We're running a little bit over. I apologize.
No worries.
I want to always on this podcast, part of it, the whole elephant journey for me is looking at faith, God, no God, spirituality. Yeah. What does that look like? Which, by the way, it's kind of a hard pivot. I could talk to you about musical theater for 3 hours here. But
hey,
so
I'm
many more
happy to
written down that we didn't get to. But I want to make sure we get to this also. What does that look like to you in your life? And what is that kind of open-ended? What has that journey been for you?
Wow. I'm having a really interesting and sort of powerful reaction, positive, that I really didn't anticipate, but it's interesting that you're asking me this. I had told you before, but I'll offer to your listeners that I would say I've identified as an atheist for the last probably 20 years almost. Mm-hmm. But I sang at a church for 11 years, and it was actually one of my favorite jobs I've ever had. I actually sang at 2 different churches. One church, Oneonta Church, which you may know, Oneonta in South Pasadena. And then I sang at a church called Church of the Pilgrim in Brooklyn Heights for 4 years in Pasadena and 7 years in Brooklyn Heights. And Thursday night rehearsal, Sunday morning service, loved it. And I loved the music that we sang, and it was, of course it ran the gamut, but I loved maintaining my musical discipline. I loved working on my sight reading. I loved it, loved it, loved it. And, I sometimes would pay attention during the sermons, and other times I would be on my phone and I would be working on something, writing
Sure.
lyrics.
Sure.
Uh, but I would also say that I've found myself really magnetized toward, I'm going to use the word mysticism, and I include religiosity and all kinds of faith as it especially relates to storytelling, and especially as it relates to human beings and their
Hmm.
behaviors. I'm really fascinated by that, and I've written a show called 35 millimeter that explores religion a lot. Sometimes I'm critical of religion. As a gay person, obviously you can imagine, growing up, I felt very at odds with religion and faith.
Sure.
Of course, I had some of my best friends at the church worked at the church and were gay and out, and
Hmm.
so I was also very lucky to be a part of several churches that seemed to accept me and seemed to accept other gay people.
Yeah.
Um,
Did you feel, if I can ask, did you
yeah,
feel at odds with the religion or with the people? Do you know what I mean? Like
I do.
there are lots of gay affirming churches that read the scriptures differently
Yeah,
and would tell you that you're not at odds with the religion, but did you feel at odds with the religion or with the people?
I would actually go one level up from even the religion. I would say the national understanding of
Yeah, yeah. The
the
majority.
religion. I would say the majority,
Mhm.
or the majority that has very strong views on how that there might be only one way to live one's life, and any,
Sure.
as my father once called it, as my alternative lifestyle,
Mm.
um, would be at odds with that. And I think that that particular majority is very vocal and can be very vitriolic.
Yeah.
Um, and I also think, and this is going to connect to the sort of twist that I experienced when you asked me this. I think for a large part of my life, I, especially my writing life, I was looking for the notion of God as, I was looking to make sense of faith, because for me, Bible stories and Bible teachings, I understood and understand what they are there for, and scripture of all faiths, I understand what it is all there for. But
Sure.
the way that I was able to make sense of it for me was to sort of figure out, how do you see faith and God, or whatever God is? How do you see that in here and now? I
Mm.
wrote a song called The Seraph,
Hmm.
and the first two-thirds of that song are about what you believe is somebody who's been saved by this
Hmm.
angel figure, the Seraph,
Hmm.
and that they have sort of healed them and shown them grace and shown them a path forward. And then you find in the third verse and chorus that this person doesn't believe in God, and has very secular views
Yeah.
on the world. And the point of the song is that it's, they found God, or they found faith in their love, in their partner.
Yeah.
But the twist that I had when you sort of asked me this, one of the things I've always thought about faith and religion is that for the people who are deeply devoted, especially in an organized setting, I've always sort of thought that they needed, or need, um, something more than what we have here and
Sure.
now, and that they needed some kind of hope or belief or guidance beyond that. And I think I'm actually entering a time in my life, believe it or not, where I think I may be in the market for that. I don't think it's going to be religion for me, but I think for so much of my life, and I think some people can identify with this, I felt like I knew what I believed in. I felt like I knew what was what was right and what was wrong. I felt like I had support around me that feels almost religious in terms of its power over me, its guidance over me.
Mhm.
It's the feeling that it is watching over me. This love, this family is sort of watching over me.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, I feel like at 38, I'm sort of entering a new phase of my life, which is that I'm open to more. I've gotten super into Stoic philosophy in the last few years,
Hmm.
and that like reading something that said that made me feel like, oh, this thing knows more than me. And
Mm.
honestly, reading these passages feels like reading scripture, right?
Right.
And sort of the notion of what God or faith is in this book or in Stoic philosophy or in any kind of philosophy is sort of that there is this higher in religion, it might be a higher being, higher power.
Yeah.
I would say that really locking into the knowledge that there is a higher understanding than I have today, and that for the first time in my life, or first time in a long time, I feel like I am craving that higher understanding.
Mm.
And
Mm.
when you asked me that question, I was like, it hit me. It hit me and made me kind of go like, everything I'm going to say is how I felt,
Mm. There's
but
a different
I sense
longing,
something is sort
different
of
longing
shifting.
now.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really, really interesting. My uh my journey has been very much, you know, as a lot of people my age now are, a deconstruction of the things that I was taught when I was young, um,
Yeah.
and taught with good intention. But I
Yeah.
grew
Yeah.
up in
Yeah.
youth groups, and I grew up, so my formative years of what I had believed was junior high and high
Mhm.
school, which
Yeah.
when you really think about it, it was like 25-year-old guys
Yeah.
straight out of seminary who were
Yeah.
taking me to the beach and giving me pizza and then telling me what they thought. They didn't know. They didn't know
Right.
everything.
Right. Can you imagine? Oh my
they
God.
they got some things wrong.
Yeah.
Um and so it's very hard now to figure out what truth is and
Yeah.
what I want to hold on to. And you're right. I see a lot of times people holding on to things that
Mm.
clearly in the face of evidence are not true. Like
Right.
clearly God doesn't work that way based
Right.
on living life for 5 minutes, you realize. But there's a fear, life is scary. There's a
Hmm.
want to hold on to some of that stuff just because maybe they need it to be able to get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my heart has softened over the years to that reality, where
Hmm.
before I would just be like, we got to tell people this is not the truth.
Yeah.
uh, I feel like as much as I don't want to be a fundamentalist Christian, I don't want to be fundamentalist the other way either.
Yeah.
Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. It does. It
um
does.
but that's a beautiful journey, and my journey, musical theater, just to say real quick, is what really opened my eyes to more truth than just what I had in my
Hmm.
small Christian box. Um,
Hmm.
and I
Yeah.
I came onto musical theater later in life, not until after college. Um, but sitting there going, Les Mis, Pippin, why am I
Mm.
weeping?
Right.
Why am
Right.
I weeping at the end of Pippin? Why is this
Right.
more of a spiritual moment that I've experienced at church in the last decade?
Yeah.
um what is this truth that is out there?
Hmm.
Um it it feels to me like there's room for these discussions on Broadway, that these discussions are being had, even in something like Beetlejuice, what Tim Minchin did with Groundhog Day, kind
Hmm.
of that existential. I'm not
Hmm.
sure that we need an existential version of every 80s movie that's been made. um,
Yep.
but is that stuff that you are interested in moving forward? Is that stuff you want to think about and write about? And how does Broadway kind of give you a canvas to do that?
Yeah. I think I'm always in most of my shows. I would say I've written, though I have occasionally been critical of religion in most of my work, and none of my work, I think, points to religion as the answer. However, I have very frequently written characters who are religious and are connected to something larger and are in many ways sages or advice givers,
Hmm.
because I do think that higher understanding, it's important as we go out into the world and live our lives. It's important to remember that we don't know everything. And in terms of my journey, I truly I swear on when I was 20 years old, 21 years old, I really believed with full heart that I knew everything.
Yeah.
And every year goes by, I feel like I know less and less. And I think in my writing process, I'm always going to be writing characters who seem somehow connected to something that is higher or divine. And some of it is outright religious. Sometimes those characters, well, it's also interesting because I think we have sort of two different kinds of things we're talking about here that I certainly think that I'm going to be continuing to explore because I keep doing it. I keep doing it,
Yeah.
keep doing it. Where, we talked about sort of the fundamentalist Christian, we talked about sort of the majority that's a little bit scarier, let's say, and
Yeah.
believes things that don't feel true to what any faith should really be about,
Sure.
which is I should say, the face of I'm what's right, I'm what's beautiful, I'm what's powerful, I'm what's correct, and anything that isn't correct is bad, right? And
Right.
so who defines what correct is?
Right.
But then you have other people and other characters who are softer, are quieter, are more humble
Yeah.
in their connection to something larger,
Yeah.
who don't need to evangelize, let's say, proselytize, let's say. And yet when you see them in scenes, you're sort of going like this, if anyone is connected to God in this show, it's going to be that person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If anyone is truly connected to something beyond this, it's
Right.
going to be that person who's over there on stage left, not the one that's stage center. And
Right.
I'm constantly writing those character dynamics in the stuff that I do.
I mean, it's kind of on the nose, but the priest in Les Mis.
Yes.
I mean, the side character that is more like Jesus than anybody
Yes.
else in that show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well,
No, I mean, and it's actually interesting that you bring that up because what we were just talking about, you have the priest who's a very tiny character who gets
Yeah.
to, reprise a little bit. And then you have Javert, right?
Yeah.
Who claims to be the holiest of the holy and really is sinning quite a bit. Really not doing the good stuff most of the time, really.
Which is, I mean, that's when Jesus came. He looked at the Pharisees who were being Javerts and said, stop doing that. That's who he admonished, literally.
Yeah.
That's the story of the gospel as I see it, at least.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, man, I just thank you so much for doing this. It was an honor to have you. Seriously. You mentioned the Seraph. I have listened to that song and Crazy Town more times than I can ever imagine. I love them so much.
Oh, I'm happy to hear
And
that.
especially, it feels to me like, especially around Halloween time, your music just resonates. So that's
Yes.
also a fun time to play your music. How can people follow what you're doing and be on the Ryan Scott Oliver train?
Yeah. Well, after high school, I added my middle name. So I believe I am the only Ryan Scott Oliver that you can find really on all things. And I'm at Ryan Scott Oliver on Instagram and YouTube and Twitter and even TikTok.
Awesome.
So please, do follow. And I'm not sure when this is going to air, but if it's still with days to spare in October, I'm highlighting a different one of my spooky songs. I've written a lot of spooky songs, 31 in fact, maybe more. So I'm highlighting them every day, and
Very
people
cool.
can follow along.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you.